So we were talking with Josh Lederman about the muddled waters, Richard, of Prigozhin. Obviously we've talked about the video that came out just a couple of days ago, but we don't know when that was shot. We don't know where that was shot. What do we know about his whereabouts and the way he's been operating over the last days and weeks? Do we know much?
I can say that.
Okay, Richard had to go away, but Ambassador McFaul, what do we really know?
Well, I think Prigozhin thought he had a good deal. I think that's what's interesting about what happened. Remember, to remind everybody, he led a mutiny. He started to march towards Moscow saying the official Russian military was not doing the right things, and he was deliberately not trying to take down or criticize Vladimir Putin. Very important to understand that was his strategy. Putin cut a deal with him. He went to Belarus for a while, but then he came back. And most recently, when Vladimir Putin was hosting 24 African leaders in St. Petersburg, Prigozhin was having his side meetings with many of those African leaders. So from his perspective, he thought that everything was in good standing with the Kremlin. The fact that he was flying a plane out of Moscow instead of taking a train or doing something safer suggests that he thought things were fine with the Kremlin. Obviously, it sounds like he was wrong in that assessment.
Are you surprised at all that he was making those movements within Russia from Moscow to St. Petersburg?
Again, it was confusing because initially Putin called him a traitor on national TV, right? Think about it. The president of the United States, President Biden, gets on TV from the Oval Office and says, these guys are traitors. We are going to deal with them accordingly. And then just a few hours later, he cut a deal with them. And that created all kinds of speculation about what Putin's real loyalties are with Prigozhin or with the armed forces or not. And I would say until just 30 minutes ago, it seemed, in fact, that Putin had cut a deal with Prigozhin and that he was cooperating with him to keep his, his mercenaries all over Africa. Let's be crystal clear. We keep calling him a mercenary and a private company, but 100% of their contracts came from the Russian military, from the Russian state. They were an arm of the Russian state. And so until an hour ago, I would have said that Putin was having his cake and eating it too. Obviously, something changed, or maybe something had changed long ago, and Putin was just looking for his moment. But we don't know that yet. I want to underscore, we do not know if Putin ordered for his plane to be shot down. We may never know, but I am curious. I want to put a question mark to that and not just assume that we know that this is what Vladimir Putin himself personally did.
I also want to bring in General Barry McCaffrey, retired 4-star Army general and MSNBC military analyst. Let me put one more piece here, because before you came on, General, we were talking about General Sergei Sorokin, who is well known as one of the most brutal, but I guess you would also say effective generals in Russia. He hasn't been seen or heard from since the Wagner rebellion. Now, this is according to state media, before we got word of this plane crash, he was, they said, dismissed as head of the country's aerospace force. Now, Prigozhin, potentially on that plane. Your reaction to what you're seeing unfolding, General?
Well, of course, I share Ambassador McFaul's caution that we won't really know. Actually, we're never going to know. We're never going to see an independent investigation that determines how the plane went down that we'll believe. We should not try and understand this from a U.S. perspective. These people are gangsters. They kill each other. Putin's the head gangster. It seemed to me self-evident when Prigozhin went to the limit publicly, calling the Ukraine war a mistake, that NATO wasn't at fault, that it was us and we did it for corrupt reasons. I thought he was a dead man walking from then on. And those who he has contaminated in the Russian regular military will now also be culled out of the herd. So I think it's likely that what we're seeing is Putin trying to consolidate power. By the way, in the long run, Putin's cooked. There's no way he pulls this off for several more years. But in the short run, He's in charge. The GRU, the FSB, the Armed Forces, the Interior Ministry, they're going to cooperate to try and eliminate Prigozhin's influence. The Wagner Group is defunct. There's no way the GRU can't take over the existing operations in Africa. So I think it was a real attaboy for Putin as the head gangster.
What are you watching for in the days to come now, General?
All that's important to us in the West should be the defense of Ukraine. They're fighting for their freedom. They understand the consequences if the Russians ever grab the country in toto, which is what Putin's trying to do, not just the Donbass and the Crimea. He wants to take Ukraine back under his control and then eliminate the intelligentsia, the military elites that have defied him. So what impact does this have on the war in Ukraine? Probably not much. If anything, it tells the Russian armed forces Putin's still got his hands on the controls, so we got to follow his orders. What I want to see is how can NATO and the United States finally give the tools needed to the Ukrainian armed forces to fight and win, rather than to try and make sure Putin doesn't have a catastrophic loss, lose Crimea, et cetera. We need better technology, ATACMS long-range missiles, F-16 fighters, 500 to 1,000 U.S. armored vehicles, Bradley and Abrams tanks. We got to make sure these people Ukrainians aren't bled to death in the coming 2 or 3 years.
Andrea Mitchell, let me come back to you. What amount of intelligence, both human and electronic and otherwise, does the U.S. have in place as they're looking to see what they can find out about what happened here and who's behind it?
Well, U.S. officials clearly are talking to Embassy Moscow and talking to all of their sources. We're talking about the State Department and other officials as well. So this is a mystery, and as Mike McFaul was very correctly pointing out, we should not assume anything about Putin. Just we can state that for all along, U.S. officials were saying since the mini rebellion that they did not think that this accord would last very long. They thought that eventually Vladimir Putin would not tolerate what he had, said was a traitorous behavior by Prigozhin, and so likely there will be a lot of suspicions about this. But there are big implications going forward for Putin as well as for the Russian military when it is in this, death match, this war with Ukraine, and at a key point in the counteroffensive.